Dear me, before you leave this year behind, I want you to stop for longer than you think you should, longer than feels efficient, longer than feels comfortable. Let the pause stretch. Let your breathing slow without instruction. Let your shoulders settle without being told they're safe. Let the part of you that's been bracing all year realize that nothing is being demanded of it right now. This is not a performance. This is not a summary. This is not a final judgment. This is simply a moment of acknowledgement. You were here for this year. You occupied it with a body that felt, a mind that questioned, and a heart that carried more than it showed. You lived through days that felt insignificant at the time, and nights that felt too loud to escape. You stayed present enough to keep moving, even when presence felt like effort. You were here, even when you wanted to be somewhere else. You were here, even when you didn't recognize yourself. You were here, even when you questioned whether it mattered. It mattered. You lived inside 2025 in ways no one else can fully witness. No one saw every moment you swallowed words to keep the peace. No one saw every internal negotiation you made just to get through the day. No one saw how often you chose restraint over reaction, silence over explanation, endurance over escape. And still, those choices shaped you. This year doesn't need to be judged before it is released. It doesn't need to be labeled productive or wasted, meaningful or disappointing. Years are not projects you complete. They are landscapes you move through. Some are open and expansive. Others are narrow, requiring careful footing. Some ask you to sprint. Others ask you to stand still longer than you planned. 2025 asked you to stand still, not in obvious ways, not always physically, but internally, emotionally. It asked you to sit with questions you couldn't answer quickly. It asked you to tolerate ambiguity instead of rushing towards certainty. It asked you to notice what happened inside you when progress slowed and reassurance didn't arrive on time. That kind of asking is exhausting. There were moments when you believed this year would resolve things for you, that it would deliver clarity, closure, or confidence if you just stayed patient long enough. When those things didn't arrive, you may have felt betrayed by time. You may have turned that frustration inward, wondering if you were doing something wrong. But time doesn't betray. It reveals. And what 2025 revealed did not arrive neatly packaged. It arrived slowly, in fragments, in patterns you noticed only after repetition, in reactions you didn't expect, in exhaustion that told the truth before your mind was ready to hear it. You learned where pushing stopped working. You learned where forcing yourself forward created more harm than movement. You learned that urgency can feel productive while quietly eroding your capacity to stay. You didn't always listen to these lessons immediately. Sometimes you resisted them. Sometimes you ignored them out of habit, fear, or hope that you could push just a little longer. That doesn't negate the learning. Noticing is enough. There were disappointments this year that landed heavily. Some were clear events. Others were realizations that unfolded slowly. The understanding that something wasn't going to change, that someone couldn't meet you where you needed them, that a version of the future you imagined was quietly dissolving. Those realizations hurt. They hurt because you cared. They hurt because you hoped. They hurt because you invested emotionally in outcomes you couldn't control. It's okay to grieve, that without turning it into self-blame. You don't need to tell yourself it wasn't that bad. You don't need to minimize it, because others had it worse. Pain does not become invalid because it isn't catastrophic. Some of the deepest grief is subtle, a quiet letting go rather than a dramatic loss. That grief deserves space. There were also long stretches of this year where nothing remarkable happened at all. Days that felt neutral, weeks that felt repetitive, periods where your primary task was not growth, but stability. You may have looked back on those stretches and wondered if you wasted time. You didn't. Maintenance is work. Staying regulated is work. Holding yourself together in a world that constantly demands attention, reaction, and output is work. And you did that repeatedly, even when it felt invisible, even when it wasn't rewarded. You didn't fall behind during those days. You were holding yourself steady. Some of the hardest moments of 2025 were internal. The conversations you replayed long after they ended, the doubts you carried quietly so you wouldn't burden others, the comparisons that slipped in when you were tired, convincing you that everyone else was moving faster, achieving more, understanding life better. Dear me, that fear is persuasive, especially at the end of a year. But it is not accurate. There is no universal timeline you failed to follow. There is no correct age for clarity. There is no deadline for becoming someone you recognize. Life is not a race with a visible finish line. It is a series of adjustments, pauses, and recalibrations that unfold differently for everyone. You are not late to your life. This year taught you about limits, not as failures, but as guides. It showed you where your energy ends, where your patience thins, where saying yes costs more than it gives, where continuing without rest leads to resentment rather than progress. Limits are not punishments. They are information. Listening to limits is not giving up. It is choosing sustainability over collapse. There were days when staying felt harder than leaving, when continuing required more courage than starting something new, when you questioned whether it was worth it, whether anyone noticed, whether anything was changing. You stayed anyway. You stayed through confusion. You stayed through doubt. You stayed through moments when the future felt opaque. That kind of staying deserves respect. As this year ends, you may feel pressure to extract meaning from every moment, to turn every delay into a lesson, every mistake into wisdom. But growth does not reward speed. It rewards honesty, and honesty often takes time to arrive. You are allowed to release this year without fully understanding it. You are allowed to leave questions unanswered. You don't need to carry regret into the next year as motivation. Regret is heavy, and it rarely helps. What you can carry instead is awareness. Awareness of what drains you, what sustains you, what you no longer want to override inside yourself. That awareness is enough. As you say goodbye to 2025, speak to yourself gently, not with forced optimism, not with dramatic declarations of change, but with quiet acknowledgement. Acknowledge how much effort went into simply being here. Acknowledge how often you adjusted instead of quitting. Acknowledge how many times you chose to stay, even when the path forward wasn't clear. Those choices matter. So goodbye, 2025. Thank you for what you revealed slowly. Thank you for what you didn't rush. Thank you for teaching me that becoming does not require urgency. I'm not leaving you with anger. I'm not leaving you with regret. I'm leaving you with honesty. And I'm carrying myself forward, gently, imperfectly, and still becoming, still learning, still allowed to arrive, with patience, with softness, with hope that does not demand certainty. Dear me, now that you've said goodbye, there is a quiet that follows. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels unfamiliar. The kind where nothing is asking you to respond immediately. The kind where the weight you were holding loosens just enough for you to notice how heavy it had been. This moment matters too. Endings don't always come with relief. Sometimes they come with space. And space can feel unsettling when you've been braced for a long time. If you feel unsure about what comes next, that doesn't mean you missed something in the goodbye. It means you are standing in the pause that follows honesty. Stay here for a moment. You don't need to move forward yet. You don't need to name the next chapter or assign meaning to what just ended. You're allowed to let the quiet exist without filling it. You're allowed to let yourself be unoccupied by expectation for a little while. You have spent a long time responding to demands, to pressure, to time, to your own fear of falling behind. It makes sense if stillness feels strange now. It makes sense if your mind keeps scanning for what it should be doing next. There doesn't have to be a next, yet. What remains after a year, ends, is not a plan. It's a body that has been carrying you, a mind that has been thinking nonstop, a heart that has been adapting quietly, often without acknowledgement. Before you ask yourself to become anything else, check in with what is already here. Notice your breath. Notice the way your shoulders sit. Notice whether you feel guarded or open, tired or neutral, relieved or unsure. There is no correct response. You might be tempted to rush out of this moment, to distract yourself, to re-engage urgency, to start preparing for what's ahead. That impulse is familiar. It has helped you survive before. But survival is not the same as presence, and right now, presence is enough. Let yourself arrive in the aftermath. You don't need to justify the way you ended the year. You don't need to explain why you're not more excited, or more hopeful, or more motivated. Feelings don't arrive on schedule, and they don't owe anyone coherence. If all you feel is quiet, let it be quiet. If what you feel is heaviness without a clear reason, let it be heavy. If what you feel is relief mixed with uncertainty, let both exist. You don't need to resolve this moment into clarity. You've been taught, subtly, repeatedly, that pauses are unproductive, that stillness is something to push through, that if you're not moving forward, you're wasting time. But pauses are where your nervous system catches up to your life. They are where meaning settles instead of being forced. You are allowed to pause without explanation. There may be parts of you that are restless right now, parts that want direction, structure, reassurance, parts that feel exposed without the familiar pressure of a year in motion. Be gentle with those parts. They learned to equate movement with safety. They don't know yet that safety can also exist in rest. Nothing bad is about to happen, because you're not rushing. You might notice yourself replaying moments from the year, not to analyze them deeply, but because your mind is still processing what it carried. Memories may surface unexpectedly. Regrets may flicker. Relief may arrive in waves. Let these things pass through without grabbing onto them. Processing does not require interrogation. There is a difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection is spacious. Rumination is tight. If your thoughts begin to circle in ways that feel punishing, gently shift your attention back to the present, to something tangible, to something grounding. You don't need to solve your past to deserve rest. After a long period of endurance, it can be hard to remember who you are without the weight. You may feel undefined right now, not broken, just unshaped. That can be uncomfortable, especially if you're used to defining yourself by effort, resilience, or productivity. But identity is not lost in stillness. It reveals itself there. You are not disappearing because you're resting. You are not becoming irrelevant because you're quiet. You are not falling behind because you're not rushing into the future. You are recalibrating. There is wisdom in letting yourself exist without direction for a while. Not because you'll stay there forever, but because you've earned the chance to listen inwardly instead of outwardly. The noise of expectation dulls intuition. Quiet sharpens it. Right now, you don't need intuition to tell you where to go. You just need it to tell you how you feel. That is enough information for this moment. You may notice a subtle grief underneath the quiet. Not just for what the year was, but for how long you've been holding yourself together. For how often you've been strong when you wanted softness. For how rarely you've been witnessed in your effort. That grief is not weakness. It is recognition. Recognition that you've been doing more than you allowed yourself to admit. You don't have to turn that grief into a lesson. You don't have to transform it into motivation. You can simply let it be seen. Seen by you. Held by you. Released slowly, if and when it's ready. You are allowed to grieve without performing resilience afterward. As you sit in this continuation, this space after the ending, remember that nothing is required of you right now. Not reflection, not gratitude, not optimism, not resolve. You are not behind because you are resting. You are not late because you are quiet. You are not failing because you are unsure. You are transitioning. Transitions are rarely loud. They are subtle shifts in orientation, a loosening of old urgency, a questioning of familiar pressure, a gradual turning inward before the next outward movement. You don't need to rush through this. Soon enough, the world will ask things of you again. Decisions, responses, effort, direction. But right now, you are allowed to exist without agenda, to breathe without counting time, to feel without naming purpose. This is not avoidance. This is integration. Integration is what allows change to stick without burning you out. It is what allows growth to be sustainable rather than forced. It is what turns survival into something gentler over time. You are doing that now, even if it doesn't look like anything. If you feel tempted to compare yourself to others who seem ready, energized, excited, remember that you don't know what they are carrying. You don't know what they are postponing. You don't know what they are outrunning. Your path does not need to mirror anyone else's momentum to be valid. What matters is how it feels inside you. Check in again. Does your body feel tight or loose? Does your breath feel shallow or deep? Do you feel the urge to brace or the urge to soften? Let your answers guide you gently, without judgment. There is nothing to prove in this moment. No one is watching. No one is scoring your transition. You don't need to demonstrate readiness for what's next. Readiness is not something you perform. It's something you sense. And sensing takes time. You are allowed to let the future approach you slowly. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to prepare perfectly for it. You don't have to meet it with answers. You can meet it as you are, grounded, honest, and still becoming. For now, stay with this quiet. Stay with the after. Stay with the part of you that has finally set something down. You don't need to pick anything else up yet. with patience, with gentleness, with trust that does not rush itself. Me,